Hello, and welcome to Stanley Chess. If you don't already know the basics of how to play the game of chess, like how to move the pieces and castling and all that fun stuff, make sure to check out the videos linked in the description. Today, we're going to be going over how to checkmate the enemy king with just our own king and a queen. Let's jump in. Alright, so if you already know the basics of the game, then you should recognize this position and see that white can checkmate the black king in one move here. It's checkmate in one, and that would be moving the queen to g7. Checkmate, if you don't remember, just means the king is in check, it's being attacked, and it has no way of getting out of check. So here the queen blocks off the king's escape squares, and the black king cannot capture our queen because our own king is defending it. So this is checkmate, game over, white wins. This is an important position because it's going to be what we are trying to achieve. See, in a real game, you're not going to often get a position like this right away because the kings are going to probably be in the center of the board, and you're going to have to find a way to push the enemy king to the edge of the board so that we can bring our own king and checkmate the king. So we want to get to this position so that we can just swing our queen over and checkmate the enemy king. And for all of these positions, for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to keep white as us. So we are going to have the queen, so we're going to be checkmating black. In a real game, you could be playing with white or black, but just so we're not flipping back and forth, we're going to be playing with white. If we take a look at this position here, then we see the black king is on the edge of the board, which is good. It's what we want. So as long as the black king is on the side of the board, on any of these four sides, then we can go ahead and do this, which is bringing the queen to cut off the king. Very important. See, the king is on the edge of the board, and now the king has no way of escaping back into the center. So he's trapped to only shuffling between these three squares. It can never approach the queen, because it would be going into check if it went here or here, and it cannot escape this way. So the king has to just shuffle. So once we cut off the king, we can just bring our own king like this, and black has nothing better to do than to shuffle around, and we're going to bring our king until we're as close as we can get. And if we look here, we have checkmate in one, and the king defends our own queen. We're going to swing the queen over and smother the black king with our queen, and it's checkmate. This is a slightly different position, and that's only because the black king is not on the back rank, he's on the side of the board, which still works. As long as the king is on one of the four sides, it works. So our first step is what? Cut off the king. We swing our queen over, and where would we want to go? Well, to b3, because that would cut off the king along the side of the board that he's already on. So we swing our queen. It is black's move. We swing our queen over, and black, again, has nothing that he can do than shuffle between these four squares, and we are just going to bring our own king towards the black king, and he's going to try and run away. We're not going to let him. And if he goes to a6, we have checkmate on b6, and if he goes to a8, then we have checkmate on b7. All right, now let's start looking at what happens if the enemy king is in the center of the board. We need to push the king to the edge of the board so that we can cut him off, bring our king, and checkmate. So how do we do that? Well, the easiest way is just to continue cutting off the amount of squares that the king has access to. So to do that, we are going to keep our queen a knight's distance away from the king, like this. You see the queen here, if it were a knight, it would be checking the black king because it is a knight's distance away, 2 squares up and 1 over. And what that does is it creates a box like this. And the king has no choice but to stay within that box like this. I guess he can't go to this square, but you see what I mean. So let's say the king makes a move. We're going to keep a knight's distance away. We don't want to give checks because now the king is going to run this way. And we were trying to bring the king in here, but now he has access to this side of the board, and that's not what we were trying to do. So we don't want to give checks for no reason. We want to squeeze the king towards the edge of the board. So here, we're going to go to d4 because it's a knight's distance. And let's say the king goes here to f5. Again, we don't want to give checks if we don't have to. We also, even though this would be a knight's distance away from the king, we don't want to go there because now look at this giant box that the king is in. Instead of, a tiny box here, he has access to all those squares that we didn't want him getting to. So that's not going to work. So king f5, we want to go queen to e3 to continue pushing the king towards this corner. So we're going to go queen e3. And now the king cannot go to this file. So he's going to run. The king wants to avoid going to the edge of the board because that's where it's easy to get checkmated. So he might run this way. And now do we see the move? We're going to go a knight's distance and go to e4. Like this. And now you see the box is getting much smaller, smaller and smaller. And the king is eventually going to be forced to go to the edge of the board. So let's say the king goes to g7. We have two options here. We can go f5 or e6. Both of them are knight's distance away, and both of them continue pushing the king towards the edge of the board. So either of them is fine. So we can go to e6, and you see that knight's distance. And now the king is actually forced to go to the edge of the board. He only has 3 legal moves, and all of them are on the edge of the board. So let's say he goes here to f8. Now what do? As soon as the king gets to the edge of the board, we cut him off. And how do we do that? Well, we see queen d7 cuts off the king, so we can go here. And now we've seen this position. He only has access to those 3 squares. And then and only then do we start running our king up the board until we get like this. And the queen can swing over and checkmate the black king. If we go back to the beginning of this position here, we went queen d3, knight's distance, and the king ran up this way. What if the king runs here? Well, we can continue going knight's distance, like going to d5, and now the king is cut off into this corner, even though we were trying to push him this way. But you also have the option to kind of break the rule of going knight's distance, and that is only if your king can defend the queen here. So queen can go to e3. Check. I know I said not to check the king if you don't have to, but this is okay because we are continuing to push the king towards the side we wanted to push him to and not giving him access to more squares. So because our king defends our queen, this is okay because the box that was here is now going to shrink when we make this move because now the box is much smaller and the king is going to be forced to go here or here, and then after any of those moves we can continue with our plan, and the king's going to run knight's distance. Now the king is really close to the edge of the board. He's going to run and we're going to cut him off, and now he has no choice but to go to the edge. We're going to cut him off, and then he has nothing better than to shuffle, and we run our king like this, and then we checkmate. Let's flip the pieces around a little bit. So now we're going to try and push the king into this corner here. And to do that, we're going to go a knight's distance to make this box, and the king is going to run, and we're going to push. And the box gets smaller. The king runs, we're going to push. And he's getting closer and closer to the edge of the board. He runs, we're going to push. Run, push. Here, we're going to cut off like this, and now he goes here, we push, edge of the board, we cut off, and then run our king. We've seen this before. Checkmate. So now it might start to make a little more sense why we would want to promote our pawns to queens, right? So if we have this position here, it's completely winning for white as long as you know how to checkmate with king and queen. Because black cannot stop the promotion of our pawn. So black's going to run. If he tries to chase the pawn, we promote. And now we should know what to do. The king is going to make some moves. And we are going to see here, we could go a knight's distance and make that box. Or we could skip that little step and make an even smaller box by using our king as a defender of the queen. And now the box here, run, here, here, here. And let's say he just goes to the edge, we cut him off, and we know what to do from here. Something you do have to be careful of when you're checkmating with king and queen is stalemate. So if you have a lot of time on the clock, then you want to make sure that you're really checking before you make your move that the king is going to have legal moves and not be stalemated. If you are really low on time, then hopefully you've practiced it enough to where you know what positions to avoid, so you don't really have to think about it. Let's take a look here. If we go ahead and go a knight's distance away, let's say black goes into the corner. If the king goes to the corner, then you have to be really careful with your next move. Now, we know that we want to cut off the king, right? So let's say we do that. Oh, you just stalemated black. Because black has no access to any of these squares, and he's not in check, so it's stalemate, and it's a draw. So you just lost half a point when you could have gotten a full point, right? So what did we do wrong here? Well, the king went to the corner. That should sound alarm bells for you to look out for stalemate. When we're cutting off the king, we just want to make sure to avoid this position. If the king's in the corner, just here, or if the queen were here, same thing. You just want to kind of burn this position into your mind and just remember that if the queen is on f7 or g6 or in any corner of the board, if it looks like this, just know that could be a stalemate. So what do we do instead? Well, how else can we cut off the king? We can't go to h7 because black would take our queen. We can go to d7, and if we do that, the king is going to have these squares, so we have no worries of stalemate. He's going to make a move. We're going to go here, and no matter where he goes, it's going to be mate on the next move. Another stalemate position that can arise is like this. Let's say we, for some reason, forgot that we want to cut off the king on the edge of the board with either of these moves, and we thought we need to be a knight's distance away. And we went to c6. Stalemate. The black king has no legal moves because our queen cuts off these squares, and our king actually cuts off e7, so black has no moves. It's a draw. So how do we avoid this? Well, similar to before, you just want to really remember this position. And if you can't remember the exact position, make sure that with your moves, the black king is going to have a legal move, and you're not going to cut off all of his escape squares. So we see here, like this, it's kind of an interesting formation of pieces here, where there's like one square in the middle, and they're all kind of pointing at it. So if you can think of it that way, that also works. But these are just positions you want to avoid, and instead of going to c6, you just want to cut off the king, and he's going to run, and we're going to chase the king with our king until he has no choice but to go here or here, and either one leads to checkmate. Now, you're going to want to practice this checkmate a lot until you can do it without thinking about it, basically. Because if it comes up in a real game and you can't remember what you watched in the video, you're under time pressure, then you're going to want to have it in your muscle memory. You can do that by setting up a physical board if you have one, playing against a friend, making the moves yourself, or you can play against the computer. You can do this on chess.com, set up an analysis board, or go to the endgame study section and go to queenmate, and it'll give you positions like this, and you can practice checkmating the king, like this. It'll start off pretty easy with the king already cut off, and then they'll eventually get a little more difficult, like this, and you're going to want to be able to do this without thinking about it too much. And if you play online a lot, then pre-moves are very important if you get under time pressure. And this is great practice for that because you can just practice making those pre-moves here, and you can pre-move mate like that. All right, so now you know how to checkmate with just a king and a queen. Like I said, practice is very important. You're going to want to drill that until it's second nature. In future videos, we'll be covering other checkmates, like a ladder mate with 2 rooks, or just rook and king, stuff like that. See you then.